Hey, I don't want to learn. Fuck off. I know how to stream. Stupid thing. Right. Lots happening in the old sport this week. We've seen some announcements that some coaches are changing positions in various sports. We've seen that Steve Hansen's announced that he's standing down at the end of the 2019 Rugby World Cup. So that's going to be another coach, including Joel Schmidt, who's changing position. And that means there's another open position up for up for grabs in the rugby coaching world. Football's the big one. We've seen obviously Rangers have crashed out of Europa League. Celtic have scraped through. So again, Scottish football has been highlighted for not being great. Um, we've seen English clubs do very well in the Champions League and qualify for the next round. It's great to see. We've seen English clubs do very well in the Europa League, which is great to see. One big issue is Chelsea and some of their controversy that they've had from last weekend and the Europa League game is the racism scandal. Uh, there's alleged racist chanting against or racist abuse towards Raheem Sterling. Um, the amount of crap that's come out because of that, and the amount of like people claiming the media is racist against Sterling. If that was the case, why the hell in the summer would people be crying out for Raheem Sterling to be dropped in favour of Marcus Rashford, who is also black? I do not understand the logic behind that. Is he from the wrong black community? I don't know. Sterling is a divisive figure because he's such a hot and cold football player. Um, because he's so hot and cold, you know, it's difficult to really judge how good Raheem Sterling actually is. He he has underwhelmed as a player for England, especially for Man City and the other clubs he's played for. He's somehow managed to get himself out of trouble by being around teammates who can score goals. But his goal scoring record for England's poor. But on the Chelsea side of things, this is a club that regularly has these issues with inappropriate chanting and poor behaviour. It happened in France after a European game. Chelsea fans were seen to be racially abusing a French commuter who was just getting on the metro. Hello, Taylor. How are you doing? It's good to see you. God, let's get this. Right, as far as I am aware, Taylor, I think the Milton Keynes. Let me just double check to see if Milton Keynes Thunder actually have met their um, crowdfunding target. Let's have a look. Let's have a look. Because I am aware that obviously Milton Keynes Thunder were. God, where's that gone? Well, obviously, they got their crowdfunding. Excellent. So, right, I can get rid of that Twitter search then. I can restore the chat. Perfect. You see, I thought they would, but the concern is for me that for the second time in a month, a team has resorted to crowdfunding to make up a budgeting shortfall. That at the beginning of the season, all the teams agreed, yep, we can financially compete at this level. So that says to me that the system is broken and the system isn't working. Bear with me one second. I'll be back. I'll be back. I'll be back. Oh God. Yeah. So what that says to me about the financial issues within British ice hockey is obviously we saw Cardiff Fire have to pull back from playing in the Division One South because they couldn't get a team together, but also budgetary constraints. They are so far away from all the other teams in the division. It surprised me that they even had a team in Cardiff at this level after the Devils. Um, and obviously, over the summer, other teams were made aware of the Cardiff Fire's decision not to uh, prepare a team um, to compete at this level. And that's one less team, obviously, to play matches against, which means a shorter season, which means less games. All the teams in the summer obviously had meetings and they agreed with the fixture list. They agreed with the budgets. They said, yeah, we can all meet the financial requirements to play this season. That says to me the system is broken. I'm not surprised they made the funding target. I'm not surprised with that. The fact that Invicta did their crowdfunding within 24 hours for 5,000 said to me, yeah, we're looking okay here. But the concern I have is, this is the second team that have had to resort to crowdfunding at some point. It says to me the system is broken. It says to me that there are issues, and ironically, both teams operate on Planet Ice operated rinks. So there's also an issue with how much is Planet Ice charging both Invicta and Milton Keynes to play their games and to rent the ice space for training. That says to me there's a concern about Planet Ice Planet Ice and their role within British ice hockey and how much they're charging for ice rental and for a variety of bits and pieces. There are concerns there that I have. Um, but the fact that they've had to resort to it is concerning. The fact they don't really have a team that can compete as well. That's another concern that I have. Is they are just there. They've got the odd win. Invicta, they're just getting battered. And so for next season, with both these teams be able to compete in a second tier level, if they are to pull back and not register a team to play, that does leave the National League with an issue of restructuring completely and looking at completely restructuring how the division works. Because since the collapse of the EPIHL, this is every year we're having restructuring now of the league system. And that can't be sustainable. That can't be sustainable for the sustainability of the game going forward, for developing players going forward to play at higher and higher levels. And then we've got to look at the Elite League and how sustainable Milton Keynes Lightning are in the Elite League, and are Hull going to go into the Elite League? That'll be an interesting question. But it's interesting that you mentioned that. There are so many issues surrounding British ice hockey at the moment at the lower levels of the game. I think the Elite League as well needs to take some responsibility in the future of British ice hockey at youth development level and the tiers below. They want to expand. It has to be done right. I think if Hull end up going up, I do see Bracknell and Peterborough at some point within the next 5-10 years possibly making that leap and joining them and growing the game that way. And the debate could be made about the big leagues in North America, the NHL. With the fact that they draft so many European players now, to give some more back to the European game other than just giving us over the hill players who come over to Europe to play a couple of seasons before retiring. I think the NHL needs to possibly give more back to the European game in a sense financially to support and grow the structures that are in place to make sure that the game and the sport can progress. What else is there in the sporting news at the moment? I've talked about rugby and Steve Hansen stepping down at the end of the World Cup. The Chelsea racism scandal. That's ongoing. I don't know what it is with football and these scandals and Chelsea especially. This is not the first time Chelsea have obviously been under the spotlight for antics of their fans that are less than desirable. I mean, they have got a very bad reputation. They've had a bad reputation as a club for misbehaviour of their fans, both domestically and in Europe for quite some time. Martin Glenn stepping off from the FA. I've done a video on that, and that's on the YouTube main channel. That's on the channel. I did a video on that. I would say, I think he's more. His time at the FA is not going to be known for the successes of the youth sides, the women's side, the men's side. Getting back to the top levels of sport with the under-20s, under-17s, and under-19s winning trophies, and the men's team getting to the World Cup semis, the women's team getting to the World Cup semis, and beating the Germans on the way. I think he's going to be remembered for the handling of Mark Sampson and Eni Aluko and the racism scandal and the sex scandal there, where he had a file. When Mark Sampson was applying for the role after he had left Bristol, there was a file about the safeguarding issues in relation to Mark Sampson's affair with a player, and he disconsidered that, didn't really consider that, and he should have. That would be grounds not to hire, but he decided to not hold that against Mark Sampson. The handling aftermath of the Mark Sampson and Eni Aluko affair and the being dragged before Parliament, the FA were made to look very, very, very amateur and very foolish. They didn't look very good out of that. And then on top of that, you had the Wembley sale and there was a few other choice comments. He compared the Star of David to the Nazi swastika, and he said women can't take banter as well as men. And I would argue that is a very flawed way of looking at things. I would argue that whilst I haven't been in the women's dressing room, I can tell you for a matter of fact that women can be just as brutal as men when it comes to their banter. They can be vicious when they want to bully someone. Um, and I would say that he's going to be overshadowed with the failed sale of Wembley because he was trying to push through this deal through and people weren't happy with it. And the NA Luco, Mark Sampson scandal, I think, and the Sam Allardyce scandal as well, I think he's going to be overshadowed more because of all the scandals that the FA have had the last couple of years than the successes. And whoever comes in to replace him at next year is going to have a struggle on their hands to rebuild the trust between the FA, the fans, and the clubs. Do I like darts? I've got a friend who plays in the BDO system. Um, I used to watch it quite regularly on the TV, but uh, I've gone off darts ever so slowly and surely over the years. I find it far less interesting now than I did back in every January. The BDO at Frimley will be on Frimley Green, and I watch that regularly on the TV every January. It's just sort of like a family thing, and we don't really watch it much anymore. I mean, we don't really watch it at all. If I'm perfectly honest, there are other sports I enjoy a lot more, and I have done for quite some time. I think I've gone off darts. I would say over the last 7, 8, 9, 10 years. So it's been a slow decline. Um, with watching darts. I'm not saying it's a bad sport or you shouldn't get involved in it, but for me, I've lost my interest and I've lost my love for it. I suppose um, it. I did really enjoy it. Of course, Barry Hearn's had his involvement with darts as well, and there's two rival BDO and PDC promotions. I think that's actually probably more damaged the image of darts than helped it. Um, Barry Hearn and his involvement in snooker again. It's an interesting one. I used to watch it regularly. I don't watch it much now. I mean, there are other things I enjoy more. It's it's interesting. There are some characters involved in the darts world. There are, but as I say, I don't enjoy it as much as I used to. I occasionally dip in and out when I can, but for the most part, I don't really um, enjoy watching it anymore. I really don't. I just got to the point where I was like, yeah, it's just a couple of fat blokes drinking beer, lobbing things at a board. It's a bit more difficult than that, but I stopped enjoying it quite some time ago. I think with the split between the BDO and the PDC, I think that might have caused more damage to darts than helped it. I think Ashley Giles being appointed as director of cricket in replacing Andrew Strauss. He was a decent player, had a decent batting average, decent bowler. Obviously, he's had some good time coaching, so he's actually been involved physically hands on with the game since retiring from cricket. I think Andrew Strauss was the wrong guy at the ECB. I think the ECB needs completely restructuring. Um, Ashley Giles, I think he's a safe pair of hands. I don't think he's necessarily the long term successor in there, but I think they needed someone in the role. But I think because he's been involved with cricket at a coaching level for quite some time, with Lancashire and I forget what other county he's coached at, or Northamptonshire, I think. He's coached at Lancashire as well. He's been involved in coaching, I think, at Hampshire, Lancashire, and I think Northamptonshire. He's been involved in the county championship and coaching since he's retired. He's been involved with the England one day setup as a coach before. I think in that respect, as he's been involved hands on with the sport since retiring from playing in a coaching aspect, to get him now in an administrative role, it may not be the right career path, but because I suppose he still has that hands on knowledge of the sport. Will we see the ECB withdraw from their stupid 100 ball format? I do hope so. But Ashley Giles, no, I think he's a good cricketing brain. I think he's a safe pair of hands. I don't think he's necessarily the guy to force change at the ECB. But it is good to see ex players still involved in the game post retirement. I think other sports could could have a look at trying to see why ex-players don't want to get involved in coaching or administration roles post-retirement, football especially. I think it is a good move. I think it's a shrewd move, but I don't think it's necessarily the move that's going to necessarily bring about change within the ECB. I think it's a continuation of the structures in place, which may not be a good thing or a bad thing. We'll have to wait and see. But it's good to see Ashley Giles still involved in English cricket. One of my favourite players. I think he was underrated, but he came along at a time when there was so many good spinners in the world that when you have Muralitharan and Day, and Warne, or not Warne, yeah, Shane Warne, Muralitharan as spinners in the game, it's kind of difficult to get noticed. But he was a very solid player. He could bat a bit, he could bowl a bit, and he was a key part of England's upper middle or lower middle up long tail, I suppose. And he was a very key part of the 2005 Ashes winning team. So he's part of a winning mentality. He has that winning mentality as he's been a winner. Um, but we'll see what happens at the ECP, and also with Martin Glenn, the FA. Martin Glenn's time at the FA is going to be overshadowed with all the controversy rather than the successes that have necessarily been had. But I would say most of those successes, the foundations were set up before Martin Glenn was the chief executive. But you've got to look at how many chief executives have gone through the FA since, I would say, '98. It's kind of worrying. Since Scudamore has been at the Premier League, the FA has gone through a lot of chief executives. And that is worrying that there is no one who's there long term to guide the FA through. And there's already been, Michael, I think you might talk about this. The third round of the FA Cup, there's been a big backlash about the amount of games that are not being played at 3 o'clock. There's very few games kicking off at 3 o'clock on the third round, and fans aren't happy, especially away fans. And rightly so. The foreign TV package has meant the moving of all the kickoff times, and I think that's very, very unfair on the travelling fans, both home and away. Massive backlash against the FA. I think only 10 of the 32 ties have been played at 3 o'clock on the Saturday, and traditionally the first, I mean, I don't get it. I mean, weekend travel arrangements in winter are choppy at the best of times. We were seeing the RMT have voted for strike action over the Christmas period on the railway line that runs through where I live, out of London. We were seeing that there's several votes for strike action on several major routes, be it buses, tubes, trains, at the festive period. And the third round takes place in the first weekend of January. I don't think it's right. With the moving of kickoff times for the foreign TV audience, it's not their competition; it's a domestic competition. I can understand with the amount of money that's coming in from the foreign TV audience and the foreign investors into the sport, but there has to be a point where you go, hang on a second, this is an English domestic cup competition. You don't see the Champions League have to change their kickoff times from 7:45 or 8:15 to suit the foreign TV audience. They kick off when they kick off. So I don't understand. The FA's got to be very, very careful, because Martin Glenn's is leaving under a cloud. The backlash against this has been mostly negative. Fans aren't happy, and the FA is losing the trust with the fans, some of the clubs, and the FA. That relationship is breaking down, and Martin Glenn's part of the problem with that, because the amount of controversy that has surrounded the FA in recent years is not good. And we're also seeing that La Liga and Serie A under 11 Sports are renegotiating their TV deal and streaming service. So there's a lot going on. But no, the FA Cup third round. I mean, as a Blackburn fan, my team are in it, which is great to see. It's good to see. And I will probably try and catch a live game if I can. But I'm not happy with the kickoff times being so late or so early. There's a lot of lunchtime kickoffs, and it's not fair on the travelling fans a lot of the time, especially if let's say Carlisle and Exeter both got through to the third round and they were playing each other. You got to think that's one of the longest away days in the footballing calendar. Plymouth Carlisle was a long away. if teams like that get through to the third round and then their kickoff time is being moved either really early in the day, like lunchtime, if the Carlisle or Plymouth fans have to travel away, right, they've got to leave before daybreak. There's no trains out of Plymouth or Carlisle before 6, so that's insane. Um, and if the game is kicking off at lunchtime, they would have to leave at 3 in the morning. And if it's a 5:30 kickoff, yeah, they can get there. They ain't getting back before the next day. I think the FA have got this completely wrong. There's a reason why the traditional 3 o'clock kickoff slot is there for both league and cup games. There is a reason why, if your game is taking place on Saturday, you've got the traditional 3 o'clock kickoff. I'll be interested to see what happens over the Boxing Day and New Year's Eve and New Year's Day games as well in the Premier League and Football League. What kickoff times are changed for TV? I do think there has to be a balancing act, and I do think the FA are getting this wrong. I really do. But it's it's subjective. There are those fans that don't mind it. There are those clubs that don't mind it because of the extra revenues they can get. But if you are a travelling away fan, yeah. But because you're the minority of fans on the match day, you're not taken in consideration. If the majority of fans on match day were affected, they wouldn't do it. But it's the minority of fans that are affected, which is the away fans. And because it's it's interesting because if we look at the potential sale of Newcastle United, there is American investment, and a lot of this TV timing change to have the 5:30 kickoff is for the East Coast audience not to have to wake up earlier in the morning to watch the 3 o'clock or the 12 o'clock kickoff. 5:30. We're 5 hours ahead of the East Coast, so that means it's 12:30 lunchtime, bang on for the East Coast audience in the New York, Washington DC, Boston, the New England area and then Florida, all the way down to Florida. So half the US population can watch the FA Cup. That's why it's done. I think that is very dangerous. Uh, I pandering to the US audience is a very dangerous move because we might as well make it the US Premier League then. If we're going to constantly move these kickoff times to suit the American audience, I don't think the American TV audience and American fans realise that the actual damage being done to the domestic game here because games being moved for them so they can watch a prime time. Which also means if it's a 5 o'clock kickoff, the West Coast can also watch the game in the same day because they'll be waking up at because they're 8 hours behind. So that would be 9:30 in the morning for them. So they're catering for the American audience. That's a risky move. Yes, the Americans are getting more and more interested in European football and watching more of it. I can agree on that, but it's a very risky move to cater for the non-domestic audience and change the kickoff times. But I haven't covered it either. It'd be a very complicated video to put a decent title for. I might do a video closer to the time on the FA Cup third round. But yeah, there are concerns that changing the kickoff times for the TV audience is what is starting to anger fans more and more that go to the games regularly. And if those away fans are being affected, that ain't fair on them. It's not. And they're trying to talk about getting rid of replays, which are the lifeblood of the smaller clubs. They're talking about getting rid of extra penalty shootouts and fiddling with the way the game is played. First and foremost, they got to make sure that the fans are actually happy with the product they're seeing. And if fans are being let down because they're stuck at train stations or having stupid times to leave for away days, it ain't right. It's not right. But we could debate the pros and cons of this all night. It does bring a lot of money. Revenues are up for the FA. They do get a lot of the TV deals they've struck with the FA Cup. For the overseas market, especially the North American market, is making the FA a lot of money. But if they're putting profits before the fans, I think that's a dangerous game they're playing, and it could seriously have a lot of negative consequences going forward. The blackout rule, oh God, that's something I could look into, but I don't know. I don't know. A lot of clubs aren't happy with the TV rights sharing. We've seen the EFL clubs aren't happy with their current TV deal that they've just got. The blackout rule, I don't know how enforceable that's going to be with the amount of streaming websites and in fact you can listen to every game on the radio, on be it Talksport, BBC 5 Live, or the local BBC radio stations, or even local private radio stations. I don't know, but that's something that the FA has to be very very careful about, and all clubs have to be on board. If they can't, if one club is protesting and they make loud enough protests, um, the FA has to be careful, because we are seeing a breakdown in trust between fans, players, administrators, people in the game, and the FA. And we can go back to the Martin Glenn stepping down from the FA and look at that. But no, we have to be very, very careful about how everyone involved with the sport takes the sport forward. If they make a hasty decision and it ends up being negative, it could seriously damage the longevity of the sport. I think there are a lot of issues in play. I think Scudamore stepping down and Martin Glenn stepping down, that's leading a vacuum of leadership, which, to be fair, neither has shown a lot of, because they've been gutless in how they've negotiated on the TV deals, and they don't actually help clubs out. Clubs are left to suffer. There are clubs not happy with the current TV deal arrangement. The so-called Big Six, so the ones that pay no tax. I'm going to say that. I'm going to be blatantly honest. The fact that clubs are breaching, they don't pay tax. That's why they have all these charitable projects. It's tax deductible. You get a tax rebate on taxes you don't even pay on a charitable donation. It's how the system works. They want to have even more money and keep the other clubs down. So there's an imbalance in the TV revenue sharing. I don't know. I think the blackout rule for TV, I think there's a reason why it's in place. That was also, I think, a legal thing as well. It's not just the Football League and the FA have agreed to have the blackout rule. I think there's an Act of Parliament with the Media Regulatory Watchdog that also has some involvement in that. I think that has to go before the Media, Sport and Culture Select Committee and the Minister for Sport and Culture and Media. I think there is some political involvement in that, and you have to be very, very careful how we go ahead with the blackout on Premier League football and then Championship and League One and League Two, and there is a whole host of issues. I would say the fact that European club football is solely on BT Sport, that's wrong. The UEFA Nations League being put solely on Sky Sports, that's wrong. The fact that all club games, apart from the FA Cup, are on Sky Sports and BT Sport, that's wrong. I think the League Cup being solely on subscription TV, that's wrong. So I have my concerns about a variety of issues, and I think the FA and the Premier League and the Football League have definitely got their TV rights deals wrong, in the sense that fans aren't having a say on how they want to access. They're just told you're getting it on Sky or BT, and that's a problem. Who have Bracknell Bees got this weekend? Let's have a look at the old fixture list. This weekend we have a game on the 16th against Invicta, and then we play Swindon home and away before Christmas. That's the games we've got. So there's nothing special. We're just playing Invicta again, which basically means we're going to win. It's just by how much. How long have I been live now? Half hour. Not long. Only half an hour. Nothing major. Not long. There's a lot of things I want to talk about, but by looking at the people in the chat, I'm not sure some of the topics will be of interest to some people. It's. I want to see what questions you ask rather than me just talk about stuff that may not interest all of you. And I don't want to, how do I put it, bore you guys to death with a subject that you guys aren't necessarily interested in. I think the issue that Mike has raised about the blackout rule and Martin Glenn being raised by Taylor, I think football has got a governance problem. It's also been announced. I will touch on this before any are taking more questions. Is that Tottenham Stadium is further delayed, and they've said it now. It won't be ready till February at the earliest. Just play the whole season at Wembley and try and get it done for next season, because they tried to get this stadium on a 90-degree axis turn with the full rebuild in situ done by the start of this season. they were on a set hard deadline which they could not meet because the weather, we had that late burst of snow 10 months ago, that would paralysed any building work. Then we had the really hot summer, and they could have made hay for 2 months of glorious, glorious weather in the sense that it wasn't raining, concrete would have set nice and quick, get steel up, and they dragged their feet over that. And now Daniel Levy's basically had to come out and say, yeah, we're even further behind schedule than we were before. I don't know what Tottenham are doing with this stadium rebuild. It's making the FA a lot of money with them having to rent Wembley every game. But I don't know what Daniel Levy and the Tottenham board and the Tottenham ownership and their investors are doing. I think they've completely misjudged the time frame needed for a stadium rebuild of that scale that they wanted, with the things they wanted in that stadium. The fire safety measures have clearly been an issue, and with the amount of money spent, you would have thought they would have definitely got the top of the range, simple but effective fire safety system. They've gone for a very complex system, and it hasn't worked. So Tottenham's lengthy stadium rebuild is starting to get expensive. We haven't even discussed the January transfer window on here yet. I think Tottenham need to get players in that window. But there's certain comments coming out from the playing group that it's no longer an honour to play at Wembley. Well, it's not the players' fault they're in this position. It's the club management behind the scenes fault that they've got in this position. But I'll be interested to know what building company or companies they've used for the project to rebuild White Hart Lane. I'll be interested to know what the building company said could be achievable in the time frame that the stadium was meant to be finished by, what they could have done. And I don't understand why they decided to go for this 90-degree axis turn. They could have rebuilt in situ stand by stand like other clubs have done, or stayed open and built the stadium 100 metres down the road, like an Arsenal with the Emirates when they stayed at Highbury, and then move on. But no, they've decided to do what they've done. It's just the way they've handled the whole new stadium build at Tottenham has been a disaster. I could do more videos on that. I've got a lot of mates who are Tottenham fans. I can see this starting to have an impact on the playing group. I can see this starting to have an impact. The fan numbers are dropping week on week for every Wembley game. They're losing. Fans aren't turning up. I would say, I don't know how much the tickets cost to go to watch Tottenham play at Wembley, but fans are showing up less and less. There are less fans going to each game, and that is a problem. That is a problem. Are fans getting frustrated with the length of overrun on the build? So they're not keeping the fans happy, and that's got to have an effect. Playing in a half-empty Wembley, when you're playing in a half-empty Wembley stadium, that's got to have an effect on the playing group. And the thing is, they're not. Well, the thing is, I think at one of Tottenham's games only had like 30 or 1,000 in Wembley or something. There are a lot of empty seats. So um, if you watch Match of the Day highlights, or if you manage to get Sky or BT Sport and you actually watch any Tottenham games, you will see Spurs have a lot of empty seats now at Wembley. They're not packing out that stadium. Their fan numbers are dropping who go to games week in, week out. They hold a club record for playing at Wembley. Do Tottenham in they have one of the biggest club home crowds ever seen. But week on week, yeah, they are, fans are staying away, and away fans are staying away as well. It's not just the Tottenham fans; it's fans of the game are staying away from Wembley. I don't know what the ticket price is. I'll be very interested to have a look on the Tottenham website, and a bit terrified possibly, but it's not a good look. I think Tottenham actually are in a bit of a sticky situation. If this stadium build drags on, let's say Tottenham, down the line, a couple of years down the line, or a mid-table side, and they're in this massive stadium with an NFL pitch, but they're not winning anything. then it's been a very big risk by Daniel Levy. I don't see what the problem was with the old White Hart Lane, to be honest. It was a decent little stadium. I think a bit of a refurb, possibly an extension on our stands. They didn't need to do this whole massive 90-degree turn. It was all money orientated rebuild. It was designed because they wanted to have the NFL games every season. It's designed to make them money, and they're not just from football. We don't know what the title sponsor of the stadium is going to be. They haven't named the title sponsor of the stadium, so it's not going to be called White Hart Lane. It's going to be called, I don't know, insert bank or airlines. They could be like, the Lloyd, the RBS Stadium for all we know. It's probably going to go for naming rights. I don't like that commercial naming rights to stadiums. For me, it's White Hart Lane, always will be. St James's Park in Newcastle is always St James's Park in Newcastle. Old Trafford is Old Trafford. Notice Man United haven't, given naming rights away from Old Trafford. Stamford Bridge still called Stamford Bridge by Chelsea. No naming rights there. So I'll be interested to see what happens with the naming rights and sponsorship rights, and if they still call it White Hart Lane. If they call it something else, will fans be happy with that? Probably not. But I think Tottenham might as well just say we'll play the rest of the season at Wembley. I can see that as their only option, really. This stadium rebuild is really a massive blot on Daniel Levy's record book. I think it was a big risk to do it, and a possibly unnecessary risk to do it. But they've decided to go this rebuild, and it's now backfiring on them and costing them over £1 billion. So, do I have any sympathy for football? No. It'll be interesting to see what the FA has agreed with Tottenham to sell tickets for Wembley as well. If that is a reason why fans are staying away, you can definitely say that we're being overpriced here. But I think the Tottenham ticket price has to be high to pay off the stadium. But also, in order... Oh, that's going to be interesting. I haven't seen the Steel Dogs play. I've only seen the Phantoms play. The Phantoms look a good side at the level we're talking about in ice hockey. I don't know if the Peterborough Phantoms or Sheffield Steel Dogs. I think the Phantoms might do it. I think from what I've seen of them play, they're a quick side. They're a physical side. They're a pretty smooth side with their passing and their partnerships and their little link up play between players. And I just think Peterborough might, from what I've seen of them play so far this season, I've seen them in a few games. I think they might do it. But again, I don't watch enough of these teams anymore because there's change in the league structure, and of course Bracknell weren't part of the cup competition anyway. It'd be wrong of me to try and make an assessment on teams I barely see. I think from what I've seen, the Phantoms will be hard to beat. I think the Steel Dogs will have to be very, very disciplined. If the Steel Dogs taking a lot of penalties, then it could be a long day for them. But we'll have to see what happens. It's going to be interesting, but we'll have to see what happens. And I don't really have enough to go on from viewing them to make a fair assessment. But I think the Phantoms, from what I have seen when they have played Bracknell, they have looked very quick side. They've got some good passing, good combinations between players. I think it's going to be tough for the Steel Dogs. I think the Steel Dogs they need to keep their discipline, which sometimes they can't. So it's going to be an interesting battle out there. I think it's going to be physical. But we'll just have to wait and see, won't we? You can only play what's in front of you, and if one side is a little bit demotivated or just isn't really up for it as much, they won't win. So it's all about how the mindset is on the day as well, and how well prepared both sides are. But I think the Phantoms have got a very, very good shot of doing very, very well and winning that Autumn Cup competition. No, we don't. We have 3 games. We have a game on Sunday, and we have 2 games against Swindon, home and away, before Christmas, and then we're done. We're wrapped up for Christmas then. It's how the fixture list works. It's how they were worked out in the off-season. All the clubs agreed to this fixture list. Where have I put it? Yeah, so the fixture list Bracknell got, they would have agreed alongside all the other teams in the National Division 1, because bear in mind they would have taken into consideration all these Autumn Cup games that other teams would have played. So that fixture list is actually was agreed in the summer. Obviously, Cardiff pulling out meant there was a slight change to the fixture list, but all the teams involved in the league agreed to that fixture list back, I think, in July or August. That was all agreed. So um, some teams will have a more busy period than others. I think we shall see what kind of effect the fixture list has come the end of the season. But at the end of the day, I think the bigger issue for British ice hockey is what structures of the league's going to look like next season. We can debate, whether the fixture list is fair for some teams or unfair for others. But I think the bigger issue is what's the league structure going to be like for next season. We it's a difficult one. I haven't looked at the table. I'm not one of those table gazers who gazes at a table all the time when it comes to teams. I just watch my team play, and if they win, they win. If they lose, they lose. But I would think that some teams have not a lot of games before Christmas, and other teams have a full package, and then others are very busy in January, and other teams are not so busy in January. So if I look at the January fixture list, we only have 6 games in January. We have 6 games in February. 7 or 8 games? 8 games in March, and then obviously, that includes the playoffs. So there's 6 games in March. There's not that many games in a league season. But I'd be more concerned and interested to see what the league structures are organised for next season for both the North Division 1 and the South Division 1 and the Division 2s, North and South. The National League does the National League does need a complete overhaul. It does. I don't think the current structures are sustainable, and we don't know what the future is for Basingstoke, your team. We don't know what their rink future. How will they get that temporary rink sorted out? Will the rink be refurbed, repaired, or rebuilt in a satisfactory manner so it is actually suitable to be used long term? We don't know what's going to happen with the Milton Keynes Thunder and Invictus Dynamos and what level they're going to be playing at next year either. So there are a lot of concerns to take on board. There's a lot of issues to take on board, and I think is the Milton Keynes Lightning in the Elite League sustainable as well? I mean, there's a lot of questions to ask, and will Hull actually make that step up from the second tier to the Elite League? And what there's a whole host of issues to do with, does the league need completely restructuring? The fact that 2 teams have had to crowdfund before Christmas this season is concerning, considering that they completed last season with no problems. They met the budgetary requirements to stay at this level. They agreed with the fixture list. They managed to name a lot of their signings very early on. They got their squads all named very early on, and then they worked out with one less team in the division. Financially, it was more difficult. I will double check the table at some point. I've tried to avoid checking the table for most of the season. Blue Jays fan. Wow, 25% win rate. God, if he was at a bigger club, he would have been fired a long time ago. I don't. I mean, I've done a lot of videos on Scottish football, and I've looked at the Scottish table, and I've looked at the Kilmarnock and Hearts having decent starts to the season, Livingston, Celtic, and Rangers. It's more interesting now looking at the Scottish Premiership, because it's a bit more uncertain this season. It's a little bit more how do I put it, competitive. I think there's a long way to go for Scottish football to be as competitive as it could be. The league does need restructuring and investment, and the Scottish FA needs looking at, and the Scottish SPFL, Scottish Professional Football League, needs looking at as well. But Hamilton Academical, there are teams worse than them. They're called St Mirren and Dundee. That's also not taking into consideration how many draws Hamilton have had. Hamilton have had a lot of draws in that time. So you've got to look at the win, drawn, and lost ratios, and I think there'll be a lot of draws in there. But that's only one in 4. So every 4 games you play, you win 1. I would say there'll be a draw in there and a couple of defeats. I think there's enough. He's got enough points to keep them where they are, and they always avoid relegation. I think, yeah, any other club that manager would have been sacked, but I don't think there's the appetite in Scottish football to sack managers. Scottish football does have a problem where there's only a couple of elite clubs, and then the rest are average, and then below that, it's not great. Um, but I don't follow enough of Scottish football to really pass comment. Even though I've got a fair few Scottish subscribers and I've got a fair few um, videos on Scottish football, I a 25% win rate is pretty poor, but it's not the worst managerial win rate I've seen. I've seen worse, and we could look at the fact that Mark Hughes this season had a much worse win loss draw ratio of games. Um, uh, I wouldn't be surprised if there were a lot of draws in there. Hamilton have obviously stuck it out in the Scottish Premiership in that 3 year period, so he's doing enough to keep them up. I think obviously there's a lack of money at Hamilton. They can't obviously afford the wages that Celtic and I would argue possibly Aberdeen can for players. But he's obviously kept them in the league, and he's kept them safe from relegation. So I think when they start each season, I think what's the goal? Avoid relegation. He's doing that. If some decent investment was to come into Scottish football, and let's say Hamilton were given a bit more injection of cash and some more investment, then yeah, they might go, Ryan, what's the goal this season? Mid-table? Right, you've got to go. But I think you can only win as many games as a manager with the players you've got. And if the players you've got are average to mediocre to average, you're not going to really take that next step. But it's an interesting question. But a win percentage of 25% in most top flight leagues, you would have been long been sacked and replaced. Not that I always agree with constantly chopping and changing the manager, but I think Hamilton Academical, I think their remit is to avoid relegation every year and stay in the Scottish Premiership, and he's doing that. So as long as he keeps doing that, they're going to keep him there. If the chairman or the owner wants to look more upwards at the table, then they're going to either have to buy and sell some players and change the manager. I think there's got to be some changes there if they want to go up the table. But at the moment, they're avoiding relegation, and there are teams that are worse than them. That's called St Mirren and Dundee. And they're not that far behind Motherwell. So it's not all doom and gloom for Hamilton Academical. They could still yet finish higher than where they are. But they do risk getting sucked into a relegation battle yet again. But there are some clubs that are stuck in that sort of level where they can't quite get the next step, but they're not bad enough to go down. They're sort of stuck in this limbo, and that's what Hamilton are. But no, that win ratio of 25% is pretty bad. But I wouldn't be surprised if there is a lot of draws in there. With his time in charge, a lot of drawn games, which has also aided them in staying up. That extra little point here, that extra little point there, that's just enough to keep them that far ahead of the clubs below. But no, Scottish football has been. I've long argued on this channel that the Scottish FA needs to reform, the SPFL needs to reform, and they might have to consider about merging the Scottish Championship with the Scottish Premier League to make it a more competitive league and possibly playing the league in the summer, and a whole variety of options they could do to improve the quality and the of the game, and they need to attract investment somehow. The sport in Scotland needs a large amount of investment, and that's something else that needs to happen. Is investment into the sport in Scotland, but at the moment, I don't see that kind of willingness from all parties to put that investment in place, be it at grassroots level with primary and secondary schools, all the way through to professional football. But yeah, no, there definitely needs to be an improvement in Scottish football from all across the board. But that takes time to put those changes into place and the structures in place to then make that change, to then make a league or a club more competitive. It takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. There doesn't seem to be a willingness by the authorities, footballing authorities in Scotland, to make the changes necessary to improve the quality of the game for all. But there we go. That's my viewpoint on that. I mean, well, I don't know enough about Hamilton Academical to, go into much depth about them, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was a lot of draws in that record that he's got, of 25% win record. I think the draws is what is keeping Hamilton in that state of limbo between the top half of the table and the relegation battle. It's just keeping them sort of in this sort of lower mid table, not bad enough to be relegated, not good enough to compete for Europe, or even just for mid table success. They're sort of in the middle. They're plodding along, and obviously their remit is to survive every year, and they're doing that. So, but this is the problem with Scottish football. If you've only got a one or two or three clubs that are going to give the title a go every year, and then after about 3/4 of the season, there's only one really left in the hunt, and that's normally Celtic, then that's the problem. It does turn people off, and the sport needs investors. We know that the sport in Scotland needs investment and restructuring, but there doesn't seem to be anyone willing to take the hard decisions to restructure the sport and invest in the sport. So until massive changes take place, nothing's going to change. So I don't know what Scottish football can do. But something needs to happen in order for it to take the next step forward. Bear with me 1 second. Got to charge me fucking beer. Got to charge me e-cig, man. Why, Right, where were we? But no worries about it. I'm always happy to answer as many questions as I can. If I can't answer a question, I'll just say that I don't have enough knowledge on that. And there are some questions I've been asked in the past where I can give an opinion. I think, okay, if you're giving me the information, then I can go, right, well, this is an opinion. It's not my answer really. But there is some sports I have a limited knowledge on, and some clubs that I have a limited knowledge on. And Hamilton Academical is one of those clubs that I don't have enough knowledge on to really give an in-depth answer. But I would say the issues with Hamilton are synonymous with just Scottish football. Lack of investment, lack of funding, poor structures in place, and a whole variety of other issues. And there doesn't seem to be anyone within the Scottish government, the British government, uh, the sport itself, willing to have the restructuring conversations that are necessary to take the sport forward into 2019, 2020, and beyond. I think there is an issue with Scottish football. I think there's an issue for wider Scottish sport, if I'm honest. But there doesn't seem to be anyone willing to take the hard decisions to improve the quality level, I think, of the sport in Scotland. But look, if we look down here in England, I mean, you just got to look at some of the issues with English football. We were discussing earlier the issues with the FA Cup third round and the kickoff times. Um, those issues are still in place. The FA I think he's got a weakening relationship with the fans and some of the member clubs of the FA. There are issues there within the English game. There's got to be restructuring of the FA. The video I did on Martin Glenn standing down, I looked at the Mark Sampson scandal again. I did videos on that at the time it happened, and looking back a year and 2 months, nothing has changed within the FA. The parliamentary inquiry really embarrassed the FA properly, made the FA look very amateur, made the FA look very unprofessional, and was damning. And I'm honest on that assessment. It was absolutely damning. Damning assessment by the Parliamentary Committee into Sport, Media and Culture. Just ripped the FA to pieces when they were giving their evidence. So I think we are reaching a crossroads with football, at least. There are other sports that are in a far healthier state at the top level. But grassroots level of all sport needs to be regularly assessed and looked at for sustainability. Um, and over the last month or so, it's British ice hockey that we're looking at, with the sudden surge in popularity in the sport in the last, I'd say, 2 years. To see clubs having to crowdfund to survive, I would say, would be a damning indictment of poor structures within the sport. Uh, you know, English football, the amount of clubs facing administration on a regular basis is a lot more than we realise. It's only when a club like Aston Villa get very, very close to the brink that, you know, it highlights the problem that English football faces. There is a massive imbalancing of the TV revenues. Clubs are being forced to overspend because a very few clubs are stupidly wealthy and can just buy the league. It's like Man City. And there's a whole host of issues, but look, there's only so much I can comment on. I'm not an expert on, I would say, any sport, uh, but I would say that um, I'm willing to learn more about sport each day, and I look at uh, every sporting scandal and I go, right, this is where a sport could be a little bit more structured and prepared to reform. And um, yeah. Some of my more popular videos are actually the results videos of me watching a game, going, "This is good, this is bad, this is what happened, this is who played well, this is who played badly, this is the result." Bang! But some of my more controversial videos, um, get a lot of watch time. Like Aston Villa in administration got the highest watch time. It got fewer views on some of my well watched videos, but it got a higher watch time. And it's when there will come a day when Abramovich's money dries up for Chelsea, where Man City, we will see what happens with the financial fair play investigation and what kind of fines they have to pay in the end, and how long can Man City keep buying the league. We'll have to see what happens at Man United with Jose Mourinho and what they do. We'll have to see what happens at Newcastle. Some of these big clubs, have massive debts, and it's a matter of time before one of them cannot afford to pay their debts or doesn't want to pay their debts and ends up in an administration situation. And it'd be really, really funny. But no one believes it will happen, but it will. It will. Um, I think the rate of the cost of football is unsustainable for the average fan, and we have to look at ways of making it more sustainable. And the FA doesn't want to do that. The FA wants to keep raking in the TV revenues. Premier League wants to keep raking in the TV money. Um, and the sickening thing is the clubs could let us in for very little or for free. Half the clubs in 2016 could have actually opened their doors for nothing and still turned a profit on a match day. And those that would have had to sell tickets could have sold them between 5 and 15 quid and still made a profit. So there is a concern for me going forward that the greed in football is killing it. Absolutely. Uh, but is what it is. I mean, we're not going to change football's cultures overnight. Um, the sport itself has to look at itself in the mirror and ask itself the serious questions about sustainability and fairness. And a sport with no fans isn't sport, really. So I would hope to see fan protests have more of an effect, saying that we're not willing to put up with this anymore. Um, I think football's losing its community origins within where clubs were based in the community. I think that kind of community link is being broken, which is a shame because that's how some of our greatest football clubs were founded. Were founded within the local communities that they were based, and I think that football's definitely losing that community link more and more each season. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens going forward. It's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next couple of years and how sustainable we can keep football for people to be able to participate as fans or get involved at amateur or semi-professional level or whatever it may be. But you got to look at the lower leagues and the amount of clubs that are basically broke and are making barely any money or making a loss, and it's a lot of them, about 60%. So I can't see the current footballing structures and systems in place are sustainable long term. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to be doable. Um, I don't know how long the sustainability of the sport in this country is and around Europe as well. It's not just in this country. I think the sustainability and the current structures in place are flawed, and no one's willing to reform them. So the issues are going to be long standing until someone has the guts to stand up and reform. But we're not anywhere close to that. I mean, La Liga are still threatening to strike over the plans to take games to America, and of course, La Liga is forging ahead and is not having the support of the players. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what kind of sport we get. Um, Fans are slightly turning off. I think that will start picking up pace. You just got to look at Tottenham playing at Wembley and how few fans are turning up for games there. That's an indictment of where we're at. I can't see that being sustainable for Tottenham because they've got to pay the rent. But there we go. I'm going to leave that there. It's been an interesting live stream. I thought I'll keep it short and sweet. So thank you very much for watching, guys, and asking all your questions. Really appreciate it. And I'll have another live stream for you soon. I'm planning to do one Christmas Day as well, which will be a hoot. I will be possibly a bit drunk when I do it, but it's going to be fun. The Christmas Day live stream. I'm looking forward to do that. That'd be kind of interesting to see what kind of viewership we get and how many questions we get and how long I do it for. That's going to be really fun. I think Christmas Day. I'm looking forward to that one. Thanks for tonight, guys. I really appreciate it. Or this morning, wherever you are in the world, I appreciate all your views and questions, and I'll have some more videos for you soon.